Welcome back everyone, Houston Math Prep here, solving some more equations, solving by factoring. Some of our examples are going to have greatest common factor, some will be trinomials, but looking at solving equations by factoring. And remember, the idea with this is that we will use the zero factor property. And the zero factor property basically tells us that if I get an equation equal to 0 and I can factor the other side, then I will simply set those factors equal to 0 and get my answers. So here I already have my equation that I'm solving by factoring, x squared minus 12x equal to 0. So I literally just need to factor this left side if I can. And if we look at this, we might notice there's a common factor of x in the terms. So if I pull out a common x from each term, x times x will give me the first term, and x times negative 12 would give me the second term. So the factored version of the left side is x times x minus 12. Zero factor property says if I have factors equal to 0, then I can simply set each factor equal to 0 and solve. So I get x equal to 0 and I get x minus 12 equal to 0, because those are the two factors we have on the left. This left one is already solved, so we've already solved it without having to do any steps there. X equal to 0 is already finished. For this one, x minus 12 equal to 0, of course we need to add 12 to both sides and undo the minus 12. And this one, after that one step, will give us that x equals 12. So the answers to this problem are 0 and 12 by zero factor property. Let's look at another one, 3x squared equal to 20x. Remember that we don't start factoring to solve by factoring unless we have something equal to 0. So I'm going to move one of the terms to the other side, that I have one side being 0. I have an x squared term and an x term here. I like my highest power term to be positive. If I moved this x squared term to the other side, it would be negative. So I'm going to move the x term instead. 3x squared minus 20x equal to 0, and now I can factor this. I might notice that there's a common x factor, so I can factor out a GCF of x, and left over I would have 3x in the first term, and I would have minus 20 in the second term. I have my factors now equal to 0. If I set each factor equal to 0, that would be the first factor x equal to 0, and the second factor 3x minus 20 equal to 0. Again, with this one, the first one is already solved for us. There's nothing to do there. I already have x solved, so that's convenient. This one, I get the x term by itself first, so we'll add 20 to get rid of the minus 20 on the left side. That will give us 3x equals 20, and then get rid of the times 3 by dividing by 3. And we will get that x equals 20 over 3, 20 thirds. Okay, so 0 and 20 over 3 are the answers for this problem here. Our third one, if I scan for a greatest common factor, I notice that the greatest common factor is 1. It is already equal to 0 though, so I can factor it the way it is without moving anything around. This is a trinomial. So I look and see, can I figure out a times c is negative 20, and b, if you notice, is negative 1. I need numbers that multiply to give negative 20, and add to get negative 1. If I think for a second, I might come up with the fact that the numbers are negative 5 and positive 4. Now, a is 1, so if you remember from our shortcut a equals 1 factoring trinomials video, I can simply take these numbers and put them in the factors with the x. X times the x will give us x squared, so both of our factors should start with x. And based on our a equals 1 shortcut, one of them is x minus 5, and the other is x plus 4. So I have my factors equal to 0. I now take each factor and set it equal to 0 individually. X minus 5 equals 0. X plus 4 equals 0. Both of these aren't so bad, just one-step problems. On the left one, I will add 5 to both sides. That will give me x equals 5 as an answer. For the one on the right, x plus 4, we will subtract 4 on both sides. and that will give us that x equals -4. We have answers of 5 and -4 for x in our solving by factoring for this one. Here I have 3 terms. You'll notice that one of the terms is not with the other, so we don't have equal to 0. If I move this -10, so that quantity is on the other side, in other words, I add 10 to both sides, then I will have equal to 0 like we need. Remember, we need things equal to 0 before we begin factoring. We'll get 5x squared minus 15x plus 10 equal to 0. Okay, this is a trinomial, but first I look for greatest common factor. I notice I have a 5 and a 15 and a 10, and actually 5 will go into all of those. So I have a greatest common factor of 5. Left over, I would have x squared, I would have a -3x, and I would have a +2. So I now look and see, can I factor what I have further? Can I factor more than just GCF? Well, this is a trinomial, and it has a equals 1, so this would be a shortcut for us. So a times c is 2, and b is -3. So I need things that multiply to give me 2, and I need things that add to give me -3. If we think, we might come up with the answers are -2 and -1, and because a is 1, we have a shortcut, so we will simply have x in each of the factors here. One of them will be x minus 2 because we had -2, and x minus 1 because we also had -1 equal to 0. If I notice here, I actually have 3 factors. So when you have a number of factors equal to 0, you should set all of the factors equal to 0 to get all of the answers. And anything that gives you an answer will be a solution. So I get 5 equals 0, x minus 2 equals 0, and x minus 1 equals 0. Now, one of these things is definitely not like the other two, and it is this one here. There is no variable x to even solve when I set 5 equal to 0. There's no x in the factor 5. So I'm not going to get an answer for x. This gives me no additional answer here. There's nothing to even solve for as far as x goes. So I ignore this one. Doesn't give me anything. These both have x in the factor, so they will give me something. In this middle one, I will add 2 to both sides to get an answer of x equals 2. And in the third one, I will add 1 to both sides, and that will give me an answer of x equals 1. Okay, so we have 2 answers to this one, even though we had 3 factors. X equals 2, x equals 1. Let's do one last problem here, solving by factoring 8x cubed minus 28x squared minus 16x equals 0. Here, if I look for a common factor, 8 and 28 and 16 are all divisible by 4. X cubed, x squared, and x all have at least an x, so my greatest common factor is 4x. I pull out 4x, that will leave me 2x squared in the first term. That will leave me a -7x in the second term, and minus 4 in the last term. All of that equal to 0. I look here and I have a trinomial. A times c in this case is going to be -8, and b is -7. So I say what numbers will multiply to give me -8 and add to give me -7, and the answers are -8 and 1. And we go ahead and group our middle term. I'm going to draw an arrow so I don't forget my 4x as part of my factored version of this problem. So we get 2x squared minus 8x plus an x minus 4 equals 0. And again, minus 8x and plus x comes from the numbers we get from grouping. I go ahead and look at this first half and see what's in common. The greatest common factor is 2x. Left over in the first term would be another x. Left over in the second term would be minus 4. If I copy down x minus 4, and I say what times x minus 4 gives me the second half, this is exactly x minus 4. So times a +1 will give me the second half. equal to 0. Okay, remember I've already written my 4x factor down here so I don't forget it, but it didn't get in the way of me doing the grouping and have to write it a bunch more times. So here we're going to say 4x times x minus 4, the other factor we had, and then we have a 2x plus 1. 2x plus 1 is our third factor. All of those equal to 0. We're fully factored, equal to 0. We'll set each factor equal to 0. That will give us 4x equals 0, x minus 4 equals 0, and 2x plus 1 equals 0. Okay, if we solve each one, this first one, we would divide both sides by 4, and we would get x equals 0. For this one, we'll add 4 to both sides. This one will give us that x is 4. And the last one is a two-step solution. We'll have to subtract 1 first to get the x term by itself. 2x equals -1, and then we'll divide by 2. And our last solution is x equals -1/2. Okay, hopefully this gives you enough examples to go off of for solving by factoring.